What's up, everybody? I am Emerald, and this is the Emerald Crusader live stream. Welcome back. I am very excited for today's installment of Weekend Deep End. So, before we go forward into this deep dive, I just want to put out a few content warnings. We are going to be talking about cults, and there's going to be some murders that are pretty gruesome, and then there's going to be some terrorist activity and things like that. So if that's not your bag, it'd be time to jump out now. Also, while we're talking about warnings, there's going to be a lot of Japanese names in the episode, and I'm going to do my best, but I am not Japanese, nor do I speak Japanese. So, with that said, on the morning of March 20th, 1995, 5 members of Shinrikyo released a binary chemical weapon most closely chemically similar to sarin in a coordinated attack on 5 different trains in the Tokyo subway system, killing 13 commuters, seriously injuring 54, and affecting 980 more people. Some estimates claim as many as 6,000 people were injured by this sarin attack. It is difficult to obtain the exact numbers since many victims were reluctant to come forward. The attack was ordered by a person that we are going to talk about today, namely Shoko Asahara. So Shoko Asahara was a blind yoga instructor who would use his well-noted powers of charm and charisma to found Shinrikyo in 1984, eventually creating an empire worth over $1 billion. While cults take your money, they don't always use it for good reasons. His reasons were explicitly to install himself as Emperor of Japan and eventually world domination. They did things like stockpile chemical weapons, they bought attack helicopters, they even started building weapons of mass destruction. And so things just escalated very quickly with this guy and his cult. But before we talk about all of that stuff, let's reel it in just a little bit. So Shoko was born actually Chizu Matsumoto, and he was born on March 2nd, 1955 into a large poor family in Japan's Kumamoto. Yeah, I'm not even going to try those pronunciations anymore. He was born in Japan as one of 9 children. He had an infantile glaucoma from birth, which made him lose sight in one eye and then go partially blind in his other eye at a very young age, which was why he was enrolled in the school for the blind when he was 6. While his sharp intellect and how his charm was ironically able to give him cult-like leader powers over his peers, Asahara was also known to be a bully at school, taking advantage of other students by beating them and extorting them for money and things like that. In spite of this behavior, he was able to graduate in 1977 and turned to study acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine, which at the time was the common career field for blind people in Japan at the time. He relocated to a prefecture just south of Tokyo and married the following year, and eventually fathered 12 children, the eldest of his children being born in 1978. He opened a practice and sold quack medicines to keep food on the table, and in 1981, Asahara was convicted of practicing pharmacy without a license and selling unregulated drugs, which led to him being fined 200,000 yen, which is the equivalent of roughly $2,500 in American dollars today. So his life to him was kind of boring and not going the way he wanted it. But in Japanese culture, that seemed to be the way it was for everyone at the time. So Japan's economy in the 1980s was the largest in the world, but along with that title came an influx of mindless consumerism. This seemingly led to a large portion of the population seeking meaning in their lives, and the market was happy to provide for that need, as many religions popped up seemingly overnight to give people the purpose that they were looking for. And one of those religions was Agon Shu. Based on a combination of Buddhism and Hinduism, it was created in 1954, but gained many followers when Japan officially declared it a religion in 81. Asahara would be one of those followers that joined whenever it was made a full-blown religion. And he was extremely devout at that. But he wasn't really devout because he had true faith in his beliefs or anything like that. It was more he was trying to develop and hone his skills. He is the kind of guy that first heard about the internet and his brain immediately went to, like, how can I scam people through email? And he wanted to be the best at doing that ever. So he would wind up feigning a spiritual crisis to abandon his family to study religion in India for 2 years. And in India, he just read religious texts from a bunch of different religions and just kind of educated himself and kind of pick and chose what he wanted from the religions. And after he got back in 1984, Asahara returned from his studies and formed Shinshu no Kai. When he changed his name from Matsumoto to Shoko Asahara, he renamed his group Shinrikyo in 1987. He began handing out pamphlets on the corner, but like he did in school, I mean, he was just said to have amazing charm, kind of like, charm like a cult leader, I guess. So he used that charm and soon gained a huge following. Asahara applied for government registration, and although the authorities were initially reluctant, after an appeal, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government eventually granted it legally recognized as a religion in 1989. So the doctrine of Shinrikyo is based on a Indian scripture and the Bible and a bunch of different other texts, really just whatever he felt like throwing in there. And in 1992, Asahara published Declaring Myself the Christ, within which he declared himself Christ, Japan's only fully enlightened master, and identified with the Lamb of God. It was set up to make him a fortune, and he brainwashed all of his members as quickly and effectively as possible. There were membership fees to access higher levels of the religion, and once you got to the very high levels, it was likely that you would just sign away your whole estate to the religion. They also exposed their members to extreme pain to break their will. Followers were exposed to things like drinking Shoko's blood and bathwater, and sometimes they were thrown into vats of boiling water to purify them. This practice often led to horrible scarring and even one death of a member that we know of. So yeah, these guys were pretty hardcore. So convincing his followers, I just realized I had a typo on the card there. It says Shimrikyo, but I feel like that's very appropriate for what I just said about this religion. So convincing his followers he could float for even minutes at a time, Asahara gained credibility by appearing on TV and magazine covers with the rich and famous of Japanese society. He gradually attained a following of thousands of believers and began being invited to lecture meetings at universities even. Asahara also wrote several religious books, including Beyond Life and Death and Supreme Initiation. His purported mission was to take others' sins upon himself, and he claimed to be able to transfer spiritual powers to his followers. But that's what he was telling his followers. In private, apparently he was telling his inner circle of his plans to one day be king of Japan. He said he saw dark conspiracies everywhere. He accused the Jews, he accused Freemasons, he accused the Dutch, the British royal family, and especially rival Japanese religions. By the end of the 1980s, Shinrikyo was one of the biggest religions in the world. So, it did not take long for his childhood bullying tendencies to return once he gained a significant amount of power. He forced other members to commit things like extortion and even kidnapping family members to hold them for ransom. The Yakuza helped him set up a network of yoga studios to help him launder the ransom money that he was rolling into his non-profit religion. He outlined a doomsday prophecy which included a third world war and described a final conflict culminating in a nuclear Armageddon, borrowing the term from the Book of Revelations 16:16. Asahara often preached the necessity of Armageddon for human relief. He eventually declared, put the Indian religious texts into practice in accordance with the doctrine of Mahamudra. And he led a series of terrorist attacks using a secret organization hidden from ordinary believers. And this gentleman is Huji Taguchi, and he was reported to have tried to flee the cult, but Asahara had him strangled to death before he even got a chance to leave. A few members banded together to try to report him to the authorities, and a person named Tsutsumi Sakamoto was an attorney who agreed to take the family's case, take their case up, and soon his family that following November had disappeared along with him. So not only did he make these guys disappear, he made the guys that told the guy disappear, and then he made the guys they told disappear. So very, very powerful cult. Then they tried to push for government takeover. In 1990, Asahara had 24 Shinrikyo members run for office. This was all a part of his plan to install himself as king. But despite having over 10,000 members, they only got 11,000 votes, which, this just made Asahara a huge laughingstock across Tokyo, and it led him and his followers down a much darker path. He started telling followers the world would end in 1995 because of a mass chemical weapons attack, and it was their task to bring it about. So now it's gone from a cult to trying to bring about the end of the world. Shinrikyo started using members with positions in laboratories to stockpile botulism and anthrax. They traveled to the Democratic Republic of Congo, then Zaire, to collect Ebola virus and bring it back to Japan. They also started selling illegal drugs to pay for their Armageddon, even hiring the Yakuza for protection at a certain point. A few years later, they would make a few failed attempts to bring about the end of the world. One where they used a refrigerator truck to spread botulism in front of the Japanese parliament, but they kind of messed that up because they used the wrong strain. In a similar result, they climbed a nearby skyscraper and poured out all the anthrax that they had, hoping that it would spread through the air, but it seems to have dissipated so much that it didn't have any effect or something like that. So they had 2 failed attempts going on. And then they successfully escalated from cult to terrorist group. So on the night of June 27th, 1994, the cult carried out a chemical weapons attack against civilians when they released sarin in a central Japanese city of Matsumoto, Japan. And the police investigations focused only on an innocent local resident, Yoshiyuki Kono. So Kono saw his wife and she was complaining of headaches before she fell to the ground and started seizing and foaming at the mouth. He was too distraught to really notice that the other neighbors had started to collapse as well. He called the police, and instead of helping him, they assumed that he was the attacker and arrested him. No one noticed the truck either because everyone was so distracted and focused on Kono. And they later discovered that the truck was owned by Shinrikyo. After modifying the refrigerator truck, members of the cult released a cloud of sarin which floated near the homes of judges who were overseeing a lawsuit concerning a real estate dispute which was predicated to go against the cult. This Matsumoto incident would end up killing 8 people and injured 500 more. It was the first terrorist attack ever recorded to be done with sarin gas, and with the news of Kono's arrest, Asahara felt invincible and went full-blown cuckoo bananas. Because, I mean, he heard the news that someone else took the fall for the thing that they did, and he just thought he couldn't be touched, so his ego just overtook him even further. So he just dives deeper and deeper, and at this time the group was convinced that the world was out to get them, and they needed to complete their holy mission of bringing about the end of days before the world got them. They set up their own factory to build AK-47s. They stole plans to build tanks and heavy artillery from a military contractor. They smuggled an attack helicopter into Japan from Russia somehow, and they kept growing their army, and Asahara kept feeling more and more invincible as they did so. He ordered the assassination of an ex-member in late 1994, and in February of 1995, he had a Japanese official kidnapped and burned alive in a specially built oven. Also in February, he had 9 of his members that he thought were disloyal hung, cremated, and their ashes thrown in a lake, with none of their families being the wiser. It was discovered that in 1993, they had purchased a uranium mine, and in 94, they were actively trying to build a dirty bomb. But their Armageddon was foretold to be brought on by chemicals, so Asahara had to find a way to deliver on that. So, on a ranch in Australia, cultists had been testing sarin on sheep. They had acquired enough to kill literally millions of people, and they wanted to release the gas to have maximum effect. So they decided to target the Tokyo subway. Pulling 5 of his followers aside, he told them of his plans to end the world in just a few days. So on March 20th, 1995, at 7:30 p.m., Kenichi Hiroshi got on the Tokyo subway on the Marachui line. I think I'm saying that right. Probably messing that up. Anyway. An unassuming young man, no one really noticed him as he sat down and placed a plastic bag at his feet. As the train passed a government building around 8 a.m., he very slyly punctured his bag and stood up. And then he walked and just kind of disappeared into the crowded car. On 4 other cars, the 4 other Shinrikyo members were doing the exact same thing. After they exited the trains, other passengers started to notice a funny chemical smell. Pretty soon, with the train in motion and the commuters trapped inside, they started to feel ill, and some had noticed that their vision was starting to blur. By the time it arrived at the next station, everyone knew something was very, very wrong. At 8:02 a.m. on the Hibiya line, people were having fits and vomiting. Because of this, the train authority sent out an order to shut down all trains. But this order trapped the other 4 trains that were heading towards their station in the tunnels, so the people had no way of escaping this poison gas. There was no hope of ever reaching the next station now. So with no way out, the poison soon affected hundreds and then thousands. 2 train employees died when they bravely tried to lift the bag of poison to remove it from the car. Even once they returned to the surface, the sarin soaked into many of their clothes, and at that point, it was essentially spreading like a virus, or almost like they were radioactive. And as a result of this, many of the EMT people that treated the commuters ended up being poisoned severely themselves. Because of this attack, many would go on to be blind and have severe brain damage. And Asahara really thought he had been successful in bringing about the end of the world. But like a freaking stud, in comes Hiroshi Morita. Unfortunately for Asahara, he had played his hand just a little too early when he used the sarin gas with the refrigerator truck. Hiroshi Morita had worked that case, and since then had spent his time becoming the leading expert on sarin in all of Japan. When he heard about the attack in the Tokyo subways, he immediately connected the dots and acted on it. He went to work calling and faxing every hospital in Tokyo, giving detailed information on how to treat sarin poisoning. It is believed that because of sarin's relative slow effects and his fast actions, that hundreds, if not thousands, of lives were saved that day. So this guy's a freaking rock star. So after the attacks, even though he did everything that he could to help, by the time it was all over, more than 6,000 were poisoned, hundreds had lifelong injuries, and 12 were dead. 30% of the survivors still suffering from sarin poisoning almost 25 years later, and also 25 years later, 60% of them with permanent eye damage. After this, the Japanese government was done playing around, and they went straight after Asahara and the rest of his cult. Within less than 48 hours after the attack, Tokyo's finest executed on multiple raids on different Shinrikyo locations. They would end up arresting 200 cult members in their initial raids, along with enough sarin, guns, ammo, and chemical weapons to easily take over the city of Tokyo. However, on March 30th, 1995, the head of the National Police Agency was almost killed when an Shinrikyo assassin shot him. 2 weeks later, a cloud of Austrian gas was released at Yokohama Station by believed sympathizers, injuring 400 people. They also placed a cyanide bomb near air ducts at the Sanjuku station with enough to kill 20,000 people on May 5th. And the only reason that that didn't happen is because there was a detonator malfunction that they had. And although Shoko Asahara was finally found hiding behind a fake wall and arrested on May 16th, 1995, the attacks kept on going afterwards. With Asahara arrested, his 13-year-old daughter was appointed the head of the cult and somehow managed to be crazier than her father, especially when it came to extremeness in attacks, in follower beatings and reprimanding and all that kind of stuff. She was just a little 13-year-old monster cult leader. And so that same day, the governor of Tokyo was almost killed by a bomb in the mail. On July 5th, 4 cyanide bombs were placed at 4 different stations across the subways in Tokyo, set and ready to kill upwards of 100,000 people. And thank goodness these people never learned from their mistakes, because the only reason it didn't go down again was because of detonator failure. They just never figured out the detonator. I don't know why, but I'm glad they never did, because that's 120,000 lives that could have been gone if they had figured it out. Holy shnikes. So after this, the remainder of Shinrikyo's members were taken into custody along with Little Miss Dictator here. In 1996, Shinrikyo filed bankruptcy and Asahara was put on trial. And this would last for the next 8 years. For the first half of this 8 years, he basically filibustered, claiming a miracle was eventually going to save him. Then in the year 2000, it became obvious that his filibustering wasn't going to work in his favor, and so he decided to go the other direction and took a vow of silence, and it said that he never spoke again for the rest of his life. In 2004, he was finally sentenced to death by hanging. After his lawyers failed to file an appeal on time, it was upheld in 2006, and Asahara seemed to suffer a complete mental breakdown when he found this out. He continued not speaking, but he also stopped all contact with family members and followers, and would not even eat or go to the bathroom on his own. Rather, he would need to be spoon-fed and wear adult diapers that would need to be changed by others. And he continued in this condition for the next decade. And eventually, on July 6, 2018, he was hung along with 6 of his other followers, and they were all killed and cremated before families were even informed about what was happening. So that's the story of Shoko Asahara. But the story of Shinrikyo isn't necessarily over yet. So upon his death, Shinrikyo broke into two different sects. One sect renouncing Asahara and claiming to be a peaceful group. Now they're going by the name of Alif. And the other pretty much staying essentially the same as what they were before. There are still 12,000 members who have devoted their lives to Asahara in Japan. And even though they're under heavy surveillance, they continue to worship someone who desired to bring about the end of the world. In 2016, Montenegro expelled 58 foreigners they suspected for being members of Shinrikyo. In Russia, they have since found 25 compounds run by the group, and prosecutors estimate that there are at least 30,000 members worldwide, and there have been recent reports of them in places like Belarus and Ukraine. While there is no direct evidence of further plans of terrorism at the moment, the followers around the world still follow the practices and teachings of a man who wanted the end of the world and to be king of it. So yeah, that's the story of Shoko Asahara and Shinrikyo. Crazy cult, possibly one of the most dangerous cults ever. Definitely one of the most ambitious cults. I mean, yeah, that got out of hand quickly. But I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. I hope you guys enjoyed this Weekend Deep End. If you did, I will be back next Saturday with another installment of Weekend Deep End. If you really enjoyed it, I won't be back on Monday because I'm going to be going on vacation, but I will be back on Wednesday with Willpower Wednesday, which is just a half-hour story about someone with a tremendous amount of or executing a cool feat of willpower, hopefully to inspire myself and others to have willpower. Then there's Thoughtful Thursday, where I talk about a smart person, a really cool invention, and a really weird historical event. And then there's Chai Friday, which is the book club. We are doing part 3 of Stephen King, Salem's Lot. So if you have read up through the end of the book and want to come hang out, do that. If you haven't, be warned, there will be spoilers. So if that sounds good, join me at 7:30 on any of those nights. And thank you for joining me tonight, and have a wonderful evening. Bye, guys.